Welcome back, Fantasy Endgame community. I'm Pierre. You may have seen earlier, Chris and I broke down all the big free agent news and trades that have been going down in the NFL preseason. Well, you know what? That was just the tip of the iceberg. Since that time, there's been even bigger news, and we got to catch it all. So this is part 2 of off-season moves. We're going to break down all of the biggest deals that have gone on since that time, and of course, the fantasy football impact. Some of the moves that might help the value of certain players, and some moves that you might be surprised to hear I just don't like. So we have to start with the big one, the one we've been waiting for all offseason, you could say even all year long. The Deshaun Watson situation has finally come to a conclusion for the most part. So you may have seen acquitted by the grand jury means he won't face any criminal penalties. There's still some civil suits pending, but for football purposes, right now we know where he's going to play, and that is in Cleveland of all teams. Just when we were hearing it was down to the NFC South teams, and it looked like Atlanta had the lead. And no, it's not Atlanta, New Orleans, it's Cleveland. I guess they did what they had to do, pull out all the stops, and by that I mean offer a lot of money. Guaranteed contract for 5 years, I believe. Going to be one of the top paid players in the NFL. So, again, whether you feel a certain way about him or not what we're going to talk about here. Strictly football and fantasy football for that matter. So, going to Cleveland, you know what? I like it in the sense that it's going to be one of the best squads he's been on. Don't forget that I know the Texans have been really bad the last couple of years, mainly because they didn't have him last year. But they did get to the playoffs twice under Deshaun Watson, a 10-win team, 11-win team. He led the league in passing in 2020, even though that wasn't a great team. But this is still the most talented roster he's been a part of, especially on offense. He's got 2 really good running backs to support him, so it's not just going to be Watson all by himself doing it with his arm. He doesn't have DeAndre Hopkins in his prime type of receiver, although the Cleveland Browns did swing a big deal also for Amari Cooper. So that is going to help solve some of those problems. I'm not going to say that Amari Cooper, as right now, current Amari Cooper is the same as prime age Nuck, but that's still pretty good number 1 receiver. The problem is, who's the number 2 receiver? Jarvis Landry was released, and they're trying to get him back, but not sure if that's going to happen. We'll see who else is in store for the Browns. So right now, I would say Watson, he's got to be considered a top 10 quarterback for fantasy purposes. But don't forget the possibility of a suspension looming. We have no idea what's going to happen here with the league. It could be, we're hearing 4 to 6 games. I don't think it'll be any more than that. So you just have to be wary. If you're looking strictly for a redraft league, you could take him as your starting quarterback, but then you have to take another quarterback late. Backup quarterback in Cleveland now is Jacoby Brissett. Don't know if you want to be starting him the first 6 weeks of the season. So that's something to consider. In best ball leagues, you definitely grab Watson wherever you can because his value, even though it's going to go up, isn't going to be too high. He's going to be a great pick because you only need 2 quarterbacks realistically in most best ball leagues. And in Dynasty, well, forget it. You should have bought low on Watson last year, months ago. Right now is the time, if anything, to sell if he has an inflated value in your league. Now, I will say that Amari Cooper should be in store for a good year. I think it could be the best statistical season of his career. So I do like Cooper going up in that sense. Donovan Peoples-Jones is a guy that you can't forget, a deep threat, unless they add multiple receivers in free agency or the draft, which I don't know if they can financially afford to do at this point. I do like Peoples-Jones as a deep sleeper. I will say this does hurt Chubb a little bit just because now they don't have to rely on the running game to kind of cover up the deficiencies of Baker Mayfield anymore. Kareem Hunt kind of stays the same just because, well, he is what he is. He's going to come in, every other series. He's going to be there mainly on passing downs. I think he's going to retain mostly the same role. He's a little more game script dependent. I do like also, don't forget, David Njoku. That's right, a name that you probably didn't even think about because Austin Hooper was released. That big contract didn't lead to much in Cleveland. He's now in Tennessee. I don't think we have to worry about him. But Njoku was tagged. They kept him and got rid of Hooper. Njoku's a talented player. He's a really natural receiver at the tight end position. That's why they kept him, not for his blocking. So don't overlook the Watson to Njoku connection. He's a guy definitely bumping up my rankings after this deal. Before we get to the rest of the quarterbacks, let's talk about another more fantasy relevant deal here, and that was one nobody saw coming. That's Davante Adams going to the Raiders. Now, this had been hinted at before. Davante Adams, of course, former college teammate, Fresno State, with Derek Carr reunited in Vegas. But did we really think as soon as Aaron Rodgers said he's coming back to Green Bay that Davante Adams wouldn't? We know that he got the franchise tag. There was some contract issues, didn't get worked out. But you kind of figured they were in it together, that Aaron Rodgers wouldn't have stayed in Green Bay if he knew Adams was leaving. Apparently, we were all wrong about that because it seems like he did know that Adams had always wanted to be a Raider. I don't know if that was just because of Carr, he just wanted to wear the silver and black, or he just wants to be in Vegas, or all of the above. But anyways, Adams got what he wanted. He got the fat contract that he wanted and deserved. So Aaron Rodgers staying in Green Bay, but Adams now with the Raiders. I don't think this can in any way help him. I mean, he's a guy who was the number one receiver in fantasy before last year, and still a top 5 receiver. Still should be around the top 5, but look, no one can convince me that Derek Carr isn't at least somewhat of a step down from Aaron Rodgers. I think we can agree on that. So you've got to think he's still a wide receiver 1, but he can't be a first-round pick anymore. I don't see how you can justify that. Look, I take Justin Jefferson for sure over him, Jamar Chase, probably Tyreek Hill. There's a few receivers, maybe even Deebo Samuel I would take over Davante Adams. Now he gets knocked down just a peg. Also remember that in Green Bay, it was just Davante Adams. Aaron Rodgers only had eyes for him. They didn't really have a lot else, to throw to. And now he's got a good tight end in Darren Waller, and Hunter Renfrow soaks up a lot of those targets from the slot. That's just not going to completely evaporate. And this isn't really a pass-heavy team. Green Bay like to a lot of times just kind of throw the running game out the window and lean on the arm of Rodgers. I'm not sure if the Raiders can get away with that. So Adams does take a slight step down. Won't put him down to wide receiver 2 status, but I'd say more, to me, kind of a low-end wide receiver 1. I'm probably going to be lower than the consensus on this, but I'm okay with that because that's where I see him fitting in. For Derek Carr, obviously this is a bump up, but again, let's not go crazy and think that he can be a starter in every fantasy league. It helps him, but again, the nature of this offense isn't heavy pass volume. So I think Carr gets a slight bump, but again, probably more a high-end quarterback number 2 for me. In super flex leagues, absolutely should be a starter. In single QB leagues, kind of a fringe starter. Maybe you can argue him as a late round quarterback, a good value, because he's probably not going to get a huge bump in terms of ADP. But in this sense, I wouldn't go crazy and overreact to this move. All right, let's stick with big name wide receivers. Allen Robinson, a guy that we've been waiting all offseason as well to see where he would land. And the Rams? Sure, why not? I mean, I guess they need a receiver because, well, right after they signed Allen Robinson, they traded Robert Woods. Nobody saw that coming either. Figured coming off an injury, a guy who's been there for a few years, why would they do that? Well, I guess they just don't need him anymore. So they flipped Woods. He's now with Tennessee. Talk about that in a second. But as far as Allen Robinson, look, we know the talent is there. The situation last year, he's got to take some blame and some responsibility, of course, because it just looked like he wasn't really into it. Obviously, he didn't enjoy playing under the franchise tag or just being in Chicago anymore. Can't really blame him. That offense had a lot of issues besides just him. But still, this is a guy that didn't even once get 70 yards in a game last season. 1 touchdown all last season. That's pretty bad. Now, with Matthew Stafford and the Rams coming off championship, that's a big boost. I think it's safe to say he is a top 25 receiver for fantasy purposes. Go a little bit higher. Don't go crazy because remember, he will never be the number 1 receiver on his own team as long as Cooper Kupp is still around. So again, don't want to overreact and go crazy because again, there's only so many targets to go around on that team. That doesn't usually need to pass it a ton. Anyways, Cam Akers will be back at full health. They've got a really good defense still. So Robinson, low-end wide receiver 2, obviously big, huge boost from last year where he was worthless. But in this sense, the ripple effect here is the Robert Woods deal. Let's talk about him going to Tennessee. Now, this was a surprise deal because, again, there was no reason the Rams had to even think about trading him, except now they got Robinson. So does this help Tennessee's offense in the long run? It will if they want to be a playoff, serious playoff team that goes deep into, well, let's just see. if they want a Super Bowl, they need help on offense. Okay, got A.J. Brown, Julio Jones did not work out. Julio Jones has been released. Robert Woods will help bring that steady presence. But in fantasy, look, this is a guy coming off a serious injury. He's not going to be probably ready for the start of the year. He's going to turn 30 before this season starts. So in this sense, I don't think we can say that this is good news at all. Woods is a guy who's kind of off my draft board because now catching targets from Ryan Tannehill instead of Matt Stafford, less dynamic offense, a much lower pass volume offense. The injuries, the age, all that combined means Woods to Tennessee. That sounds great on paper. It's really not good for fantasy purposes. All right, now let's get back to the quarterbacks. Kyle Pitts now without a quarterback, and really without a quarterback because Matt Ryan is gone just like that, guy who had been there forever, and now all of a sudden he has been traded to Indianapolis for just a third-round pick. Obviously, money the issue here. Atlanta, just go ahead and blow it up. Why don't you? That's the smart thing to do. Look, you missed out on Watson. You tried to go for it. Didn't happen. Kevin Ridley suspended for a year. They got nothing out of him because they couldn't trade him before that went down. There's nothing going on here, Atlanta. They have to blow it up. So smartly, they did trade Ryan. They're eating a lot of that dead cap hit as far as the salary goes. But you know what? It gives them a chance to start over, get a new quarterback in. And their new quarterback is Marcus Mariota? It's Marcus Mariota. New old quarterback, former number 2 pick in the draft. Marcus Mariota, been a backup to Derek Carr the last couple of years before that in Tennessee. Hasn't played a lot really other than on kind of gimmick plays, third downs, quarterback sneaks and options. So I don't know that this is anything more than a placeholder. He's a guy who will start the first few games of the season, maybe all season, while whoever they draft is holding the clipboard on the sideline. All right, so Marcus Mariota in Atlanta. Even if they did have help at receiver, if they got anybody at all, even if Calvin Ridley was still there, I still would have zero interest in Mariota. But right now, look, their running backs are Damian Williams, I think is a starter, right? He signed. Not a big deal, but I think he actually might be the starting running back in Atlanta. At wide receiver, they have Olamide Zaccheaus. They did re-sign Cordero Patterson for what that's worth, and then there's Kyle Pitts and whoever they draft. So at this point, Atlanta is kind of just a pit, a bottomless pit that you want to avoid in fantasy this season, other than Kyle Pitts. But as far as Kyle Pitts goes, this hurts him too because instead of a gunslinger like Matt Ryan, a veteran, Mariota, a little more conservative with the ball. He doesn't turn it over a whole lot, but he also doesn't make a lot of big plays down the field. So I can't have Pitts as a top 3 tight end. A lot of people want to put him there already. Remember, he's only 21 years old too. So I think that you could still get him maybe as your TE5, but I would not reach for him. I would wait another season before I draft Kyle Pitts in redraft leagues. All right, now back to Matt Ryan. In Indianapolis, this is the perfect fit for them on paper in terms of real life. This hurts Ryan because he went from being not super relevant with Atlanta, which is not a good offense, to being a guy who will help this team win and manage the game, but he's not going to be leaned on. They don't need to pass a lot because they have a good defense, they have a great running game, and so Ryan is still mostly irrelevant other than as a streamer or a backup. As far as the Colts receivers go, I do like this a lot for Michael Pittman especially. Michael Pittman's a guy whose talent has kind of been wasted the last couple years with Carson Wentz there at quarterback. That just didn't really help. Phillip Rivers gave him some moments, of course, in Pittman's rookie year, but at this point, Pittman should be making that leap, that third-year leap. I think Ryan can help him get there for the most part, even though it's not a pass-heavy offense, so to speak. So at this point, look, true catch rate for Michael Pittman was 88.9%. That means his actual catch rate was still pretty good, but it should have been much higher because Pittman just had a lot of uncatchable targets. I think that he will be helped a lot. Not seeing a huge breakout, again, just because he's not going to get a ton of targets because they won't need to pass that much. But I do like Pittman. See, his arrow is pointing up after this deal. There's really nobody else of consequence at receiver in Indy right now, but we'll see if that changes further with free agency or the draft. And the other quarterback we were waiting for is Jameis Winston, and he stayed home, his new home, with the Saints. We didn't know what they were going to do. They were the other one who was supposedly in contention for Deshaun Watson, missed out on him, and kept Jameis Winston. A lot of people like this because, Winston now has a year to stay in the same environment. You say, he's got a weapon like Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara there. He's somebody who had made some strides forward being in this offense. Here's the problem. I'm going to pump the brakes on that a little bit. So first of all, his numbers with New Orleans last year before his injury, right? He was the starter, 185 yards per game. Not even 200. This is a far cry from the days when he was going over 300 yards for Tampa Bay. 185 yards per game passing. Now, he did improve his efficiency, so only 3 interceptions compared to 13 touchdowns. That's pretty good. But here's the other thing. Michael Thomas, how much has he played the last 2 years? Not much. And he has zero chemistry with Jameis Winston because they really didn't play together. Michael Thomas basically missed all last year. And let's not forget Alvin Kamara, that whole thing right before the Pro Bowl. There's a good chance he gets suspended too. Supposedly there's video, this whole incident, he was detained. I mean, I think we can't just ignore that. Kamara might get knocked down quite a bit on draft boards, but this hurts this whole offense who, besides those 2 stars, really doesn't have a lot depth-wise. And let's not forget, Jameis Winston is coming off ACL injury, so there's no guarantee he's fully ready for the season at all even. I'm really worried about this Saints offense, so I'm probably going to stay away for the most part. A lot of people are happy and can see the potential. Let's also not remember that Sean Payton isn't there anymore, all right? Head coach is gone, the guy who's led this team, this offense for years. So this isn't going to be the same Saints team that you remember, all right? But Jameis Winston is with the Saints, and that's at least good to know because down the road, maybe this offense will turn into something. And then a couple of smaller moves. Rashaad Penny, kind of as expected. He's staying in Seattle, didn't test the free agent waters. I guess he liked it there. Look, Chris Carson and Rashaad Penny, that'll make a nice 1-2 punch for them. That's exactly what fantasy owners hate. We don't want to see a committee, a timeshare, anything like that. But that's what's going to happen. So more of the same. So even if Penny does stay healthy, which is the big if, it looks like his value is limited because those big games he had at the end of last year where he looked like he was finally breaking out, that happened because Chris Carson wasn't playing. So at this point, it kind of eats into each guy's value. They're nothing more than kind of low-end number 3 running backs for your fantasy team. And you really got to hope that one of them gets injured and the other stays healthy to really have a lot of relevance in a redraft league. And then a former Seahawk, Gerald Everett, now goes to the Chargers. Chargers are just loading up everywhere, especially on defense. They kept Mike Williams in offense, but now Gerald Everett, tight end. This is kind of interesting because he's a guy, talked about true catch rate earlier. At tight end position, he was number 7 in terms of true catch rate at 98%. So this is somebody who was kind of underutilized in Seattle, right? They tend to lean a little bit more run heavy, which is why Russell Wilson wanted to leave in the first place. Everett does have that athleticism. He's more of a receiver. All right, at tight end, he had split time with Tyler Higbee in the Rams. Didn't really get used a whole lot in Seattle. This is intriguing. I'm not saying he'll get a ton of targets. I'm not saying I want him as my starting tight end, but this is somebody who could be a nice sleeper in the later rounds. So keep an eye on that move, as long as my other favorite tight end sleeper this year, which is David Njoku. Don't forget that. All right, guys, that does it for this edition of Free Agent and Trade acquisitions for the offseason. This has been a crazy 2022 already. We're not even that close to the NFL draft. A lot of things still going to change. Keep it locked here to the Fantasy Endgame because we're going to keep you informed all season long to help you win fantasy football.